So, we're coming up on a pretty big birthday for the United States, 250 years. But this isn't just about parades and fireworks. It's really a moment to pause and ask a pretty fundamental question about what these 2.5 centuries actually mean.
250. That's how long it's been since 13 kind of fragile colonies decided to do the unthinkable, declare their independence from the biggest, most powerful empire on the planet. That number represents an incredible amount of change, of struggle, and of possibility.
And that really gets to the heart of what we're talking about here. Was the American project born fully formed, a finished product right out of the box? Or was it actually the start of a messy, complicated, often contradictory, and still unfinished experiment? Okay, let's get into it.
To really get a handle on the present, we've got to go all the way back to the beginning, to a moment packed with incredible risk and some truly radical ideas.
Just try to picture it for a second. It's a hot, sticky room in Philadelphia. The men signing the Declaration of Independence, they weren't just putting their names on a piece of paper. They were committing high treason against the British Crown. And the penalty for that was execution. They were literally gambling with their lives.
Now think about how explosive these 5 words were. In a world that was dominated by kings and queens, where your station in life was decided by who your parents were, this idea was, wow, it was revolutionary. It completely flipped the script on government, basically arguing that power and rights come from the people themselves, not from some monarch. And that idea, that became the promise of 1776. It was like a beacon of hope that would go on to inspire people all over the world. But, and this is a huge but, right from the very start, that promise crashed head-on into a very complicated reality.
And here it is. This is the central tension of the entire American story laid out right in front of us. The ideal was universal, but in practice, well, all men definitely didn't mean all people. Hundreds of thousands of enslaved people were still in bondage. Women had no political voice, no right to vote. Native American tribes were being systematically pushed off their lands. This gap, this gulf between the promise and the practice, would go on to define the next 250 years.
Because, declaring your independence is one thing, actually winning a war and then building a country from scratch, that's a whole other ballgame. And those early years were incredibly fragile.
It's so easy to forget how close the whole revolution came to just fizzling out. The Continental Army was constantly on the edge of collapse. We're talking about soldiers marching with no shoes, starving through winters like the one at Valley Forge. Success was never, ever a sure thing.
This timeline really drives home how shaky everything was. 76 is the declaration, that's just the start. The huge turning point is in 77 at Saratoga, which finally convinces France to jump in and help us out, which was absolutely crucial. But even after winning the war, the first government they set up, the Articles of Confederation, was a disaster. It was way too weak, the country was falling apart, and that crisis led directly to the Constitutional Convention in 1787.
And the Constitution itself was this amazing feat of compromise, creating a government that could actually function. But to get everyone to sign on, the founders made a truly fateful decision. They chose to postpone, to kick the can down the road on the nation's deepest, most explosive issue, slavery. And that compromise was baked right into the DNA of the new nation, setting the stage for a terrible conflict down the line.
And that conflict they postponed, it would eventually tear the country apart, really testing whether the nation's ideals could even survive their own built-in contradictions.
Just look at that number for a second. Nearly 600,000. That's how many American soldiers died in the Civil War. It was the deadliest war in our history, and it was fought precisely because that fundamental question, who is liberty for, had been left unanswered from the very beginning.
And even after the war was won and slavery was abolished, you'd think the struggle was over, right? Not even close. A new, brutal system of racial segregation called Jim Crow rose up in the South, enforcing inequality for almost another 100 years.
And this is such an important point to grasp. When leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and thousands of other activists marched for their rights in the 50s and 60s, they weren't asking for anything new. They were essentially holding up the Declaration of Independence and saying, hey, America, it's time to finally live up to the promise you made all the way back in 1776.
All of which brings us closer to our own time, where the echoes of all these struggles are still with us. Why? Because the American experiment was never, ever meant to be finished.
I mean, think about the 20th century. America becomes this absolute powerhouse. It helps defeat fascism, stands up to the Soviet Union during the Cold War, and does the impossible by putting astronauts on the moon. And yet,
While the US was becoming a global superpower, those same old, intense debates about freedom and equality were still being fought tooth and nail right here at home.
You know, the founders themselves kind of knew this was how it would be. There's that famous story about Benjamin Franklin. When he was leaving the Constitutional Convention, someone asked him what kind of government they had created. He didn't say a perfect democracy. He said, a republic, if you can keep it. The whole idea is that it's not a given. It's a project that requires constant work from every generation.
So here we are, 250 years later, and guess what? We are still wrestling with the exact same big questions. How do we balance individual liberty with the need for social order? How do we make sure that equality under the law is real for everyone? These aren't new arguments, they are the original American arguments.
So when you really boil it all down, the American story isn't some straight, clean line of progress. It's more like a cycle. It starts with this incredible declaration of ideals. That's followed by a history full of contradictions to those ideals. Then comes a long, hard struggle to close that gap. And finally, the realization that this whole thing is an ongoing experiment.
That 250th anniversary, it's not really an endpoint. It's more like a milestone in a story that's still being told. The Declaration of Independence wasn't the final word. It was the opening sentence. The next chapter? Well, it hasn't been written yet. And the only real question is, what part will you and I play in writing it?